And welcome in everybody to a fun edition of the High Low Sports Podcast. We appreciate y'all for joining us here on this Wednesday evening, or if it is one of your favorite places to check out podcasts later in the weekend. We got ourselves a doozy here today, and we're not going to waste any time. We're going to get right into it. DJ joined as always by my co-host Kelsey. And Kelsey, we're going to talk about one of the most exciting, fun, and unbelievably frustrating parts of all sports. We're talking fantasy football today.
Oh, I thought about your team losing, but yeah, that works too. Fantasy football, obviously. My fantasy football team losing is extra painful for me as well. Usually because I end up losing to you in the finals, so that's never fun.
Hey, to be fair, last year if you would have got to the playoffs, you would have smoked me in round one. But because Tyreek Hill had to get hurt, I dodged the bullet there, so I got lucky in that regard.
Yeah. No, you dodged me this last year, but hey, that's okay. That's what we got this year for.
Dodged my way all the way to the championship, so it's all good. You know, it doesn't matter who you play; it matters when you play them. But today, as you can tell by the title, we're going with some rankings. We got a long ways to go until the start of the season, but it is just about fantasy football draft season. A lot of people are starting to get their drafts underway. Training camps are underway. Some of the best ball and dynasty leagues get their stuff going right now. So we're going to do our best here to help some of you all with some of our position rankings at this point in the season, which we will be periodically updating throughout the season, taking a look at different things as well. So we got a lot of fantasy football coverage and, of course, the Fantasy Football Expo, which you will hear a lot about from us next week. But today, we're going to go over some rankings, and just a fair warning, this is all from just a PPR scoring standpoint is what these are ranked off of. Not a half-point PPR, not standard. I'm basing these exclusively off PPR, so that's why some of these guys might be ranked higher. Some of their point totals that I reference might be a little bit different than ones that you see. It depends on which league that you play, but we're going to put an emphasis on PPR since that is the one that Kelsey and I both prefer exclusively as well. Because if someone catches 10 passes, they deserve 10 points, not a high five and a fist bump.
But yeah, no, I played too many non-PPR leagues before I learned, and it was brought into the light, if you will, before I was baptized. And, you know, that's, yeah, the moment that I learned about PPR and how great it was to get rewarded for the number of catches and number of touches my player got, it's like, all right, well, my life just changed because here I was with high usage guys getting 20 to 40 yards in a game, but they're still getting 20 touches, but they just had a really bad game against number one defense. I'm getting stomped by a guy who has 2 touches, 40 yards, but like one of those was like, all right, well, he went 40 yards for a touchdown. Like, I mean, come on. Like, I should be able to keep up with that if I get 20 touches every time.
The one that comes to mind is Brian Westbrook back in the day with the Eagles. In a non-PPR league, he was just okay. He was a flex player. In a PPR league, he's a first-round pick. We've seen a lot of that in recent years. Austin Eckler, for example, the last handful of years. And maybe we talk about Austin Eckler today. Maybe not. We'll have to see the Commanders' new running back. But without further ado, we've listened to us joke around enough. We got ourselves some rankings to get into. And Kelsey, you're going to be the guest of honor. Of which position are we going to start with?
Oh, man, I think we got to go right from the jump. We got to go through the number 2 position that most people draft in the stats, but probably the most crucial position for you to get a win. I'm saying quarterback.
All right, we're going to go ahead and go with the fantasy football rankings for the quarterbacks. We're going to go from 10 to 1. Once again, this is PPR, so this does not affect the quarterbacks at all. Number 10, we're going to go with the guy who was 5th last year in fantasy football scoring. We're going with Jordan Love, the signal caller out of Green Bay, the second-year starter now for Green Bay. Last year, as I mentioned, 5th overall in scoring, 330 total points. The catch to it is everyone kind of remembers some of those rough moments as well, like Atlanta trying to take the snap from the guard. He had some rough moments here, but after week 6, after that bye week, he averaged about 20 points per game. He had one game where he had 2 games under 15 points and 1 under 10. So from week 7 to week 18, he was outstanding. Most importantly, to that week 16, 17, 18 playoff stretch, he got you 24, 28, and 18 and a half. And we saw what he did in the playoffs too. 32 passing touchdowns. He had 4 rushing touchdowns to go with it as well. Also, part of the reason he's here is I think they're going to be even better offensively. He has another year under the belt. Christian Watson, in theory, should be back and not dealing with the death of his hamstring for an entire season. That adds a vertical threat they did not have. Jaden Reed came on really strong last year down the stretch during that run where Jordan Love really took off. Jaden Reed's going to have a full year under his belt now as arguably the number 1, a guy you may be able to stack these guys. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but you'll have a complimentary piece of Luke Musgrave, the really good tight end that they drafted last year, didn't get to see a lot of time coming off the injury. I do really like bringing in Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd. Are they Aaron Jones in his heyday? Obviously not. Aaron Jones was a fantasy dynamo 3 years ago. He won me a league in 2020 and 2019. He's probably not quite there, especially with the injury, so I think bringing in those guys is going to help offset that as well. And defensively, they did get better, which I think is going to lead to more opportunities. And of course, let's not forget, arguably the elephant in the room for the Green Bay receivers as well as quarterback. On paper, they have the fourth easiest strength of schedule right now, which means there are going to be a lot of games where he could be expected to have a pretty good day. When you have the fourth easiest schedule, I think that bodes well for someone coming off a top 5 fantasy quarterback performance, as it was. And the best part with Jordan Love is no one really notices him. I think in a lot of places, his average draft position is in like the 13th round, give or take, 10 to 13. It depends if it's a 12, 10, however big the league is. A lot of the mock drafts I did, I was able to fill out an entire starting lineup besides quarterback and go grab him, which means I could stack him with 2 running backs early, 2 mid-round receivers, a Jaden Reed in the flex. I have a stack with those 2, a good tight end. So I like Jordan Love at number 10. I think he's going to have a really good season. I think we're going to see him more on the move this year, too. I think we're going to see a little bit more of his legs integrated now that he's more comfortable, more Matt LaFleur's offense. We saw it with Aaron Rodgers, too. As you get more used to it, it only gets easier. And Christian Watson stretching the defense. I like what Jordan Love's going to be able to do next year. Jordan Love, we're going to go with fantasy quarterback number 10, a guy who Kelsey actually had on one of his teams at one point last year as well. So I think you might be in agreement with me. There's a lot of love for Mr. Love.
Yeah, I'm okay with this. This is as a number 10 spot is okay with me. Mostly because of this 10 spot. With fantasy quarterbacks, I have a hard time when you get to the 9-10 range, differentiating between a 9 and 10 and a 15-16 guy. And what I mean by that is it's hard sometimes because a lot of times you're required to rely on the development of these guys' receivers. Now, what I like about Jordan Love more so than a lot of other guys, young guys especially, you mentioned some great weapons, but you missed one, and that's Romeo Doubs. You got to add him in the list because at the end of last year, it was a rotating carousel of guys that would just step up and have a 180, 90-yard game and a touchdown. Obviously, everybody remembers Christian Watson's wild touchdown outbreaks every time I benched him. But that's besides the point where you have Romeo Doubs, you have Reed, you have Luke Musgrave stepping up as well. They have a backup tight end as well who doesn't get as much love, who probably deserves some. When Musgrave was out, he was one of the leading pass catchers as a tight end. As you said, they're bringing in new running backs. Josh Jacobs will do nothing but help the run game or help the pass game for Jordan Love. So that gives him opportunities. Plus, takes a little bit of the pressure off. He's not relying on, their team's not relying on throwing the ball 55 times in a game. Instead, you only have to throw it 35 times, and you get a lot better boxes and a lot better defensive backs to throw against as far as the scheme goes. Because you got to have people inside the box to worry about Josh Jacobs. So you're going to have a lot more one-on-ones for these extremely fast and extremely talented receiving core to get by. So, yeah, I like Jordan Love at 10. I don't have any complaints at this one.
I like Josh Jacobs in the passing game, too, because he can catch. Same with Marshawn Lloyd out of USC. I think they're going to help out a lot with some of those wide zone stretch, backside screens. There's a lot to be had there, but we got plenty of time. I still got 9 more quarterbacks and a lot more to get through. So we're going to cruise into number 9, who I think this is a potentially league-winning pick here, depending on when you get him. He's back, and his legs are running full speed with the Mr. Krabs sound effects. We have the return of Kyler Murray. Last year, obviously, he missed a lot of time, missed most of the season. He's been a fantasy dynamo basically since the day he walked into the NFL. And even last year on that very, very miserable Cardinals team, they were a rejuvenated team when he came back in week 10. He gave you 18, 22, 20, 20, 24, 18 points. He had a couple in there where he had like 11. I think he had 11 and 13 at a couple of different, 15 at a few different times. So not one point did he score under 10 points. And he averaged about 21 down the stretch. He was a top 5 scoring quarterback down that stretch. You're now giving him Marvin Harrison Jr. on the outside. You added Zay Jones, who in spurts can be really, really explosive as a number 2 option. You have Trey McBride, who came on strong last year. You have you had a really good draft on top of it, not just their offensive line's stronger, defense is better. Jonathan Gannon, I think, is starting to get some of his guys defensively. Say what you want about him in Philly, they looked much worse without him. So obviously, I think there's going to be an improvement there. Defensively, more opportunities. Kyler Murray's just always been up here, what he could do with his legs and his arm. Marvin Harrison's going to be out there somewhere. Trey McBride, we started seeing Kyler Murray throw the ball over the middle more, which he hadn't done as much in his career. Now that he has someone like Trey McBride over the middle, I like what Kyler Murray brings to the table a lot, and the team is much better. So Kyler Murray's back, and he could be he's someone you pick around in that round 10, 11-ish range as well if he's still there, and he might just win you your league because you were able to stack the deck around him, and then Kyler Murray gives you your steady 18 to 23 points per week with just you can hear the Mr. Crab sound effects when he runs around the backfield and throws an absolute laser. He's absolutely dynamic, and that team is sneakily a whole lot better. Very few teams improved as much as the Cardinals did in the offseason. And on top of that, Kyler Murray, their strength of schedule is definitely not easy being in the NFC West, but it wasn't easy down the stretch last year, and he still made it happen. So give me Kyler Murray here as QB9, who I think is he could be the quote-unquote secret league-winning quarterback, if you will. Not to mention, he did that last year coming off a torn ACL. Fresh off the torn ACL. Now I give him an offseason. I like what I see in Arizona.
Yeah, I like this. I think this is a really good pick at 9. I think that it's one that I think just makes sense for how talented he is, what all he can do. Because you never know. He can be one of those guys that can go off for 54 if you're really good, because he just has a big game. He runs the ball well. When he gets out of the pocket, he knows how to get out, get downfield, and then get down and stay healthy now. He's not going to be the guy that gets beat up every time he goes downfield. So, that's something that's important for this, especially when you talk about a running quarterback, a talented quarterback like Kyler, who, by the way, I have my own complaints about throughout his career. But the one thing I think we can all agree on is the dude knows how to play, and as long as he can stay healthy and have receivers healthy and to throw the ball to, and his offensive line keeps him upright, I think we have every opportunity to see the best Kyler Murray we've ever seen before. Because Zay Jones is an underrated piece. I know a lot of people are looking at that like, it's Zay Jones. Who cares? Does nobody remember what he did with Las Vegas not even a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, where he is the number one target at times in a team
very underrated number 2 receiver. When you put him out there too, like that, he's going to make some sneaky plays. Someone who's going to randomly play him as a flex is going to win a week next year just because of Zay Jones. It's going to piss that opponent off so bad.
Yeah. So if anybody's wondering, by the way, what DJ's talking about with the Mr. Krabs sound effect, here you go.
Now listen to that one next time Kyler Murray scrambles while wearing red.
All up and down the field. That's all I got to say.
It's incredible, but it's absolutely hilarious. So Kyler Murray at number 9 won me a league back in the day too, and I think he's going to be back with a vengeance this year as well. Number 8, this one's going to punch Kelsey right in the chest, but we got Dak Prescott at number 8. Say Cowboys fans that say what you want about him, the playoffs, all that sort of thing. When it comes to fantasy football, he is as good as it gets. He had 3 games last year where he scored under 10. The San Francisco, the Bills game, and then the Giants week 1 where the defense scored 40 points without him. He wasn't even needed. Throughout the rest of the year, though, he was, I believe, the top 3 fantasy scoring quarterback throughout the year. 28, 29. He peaked at 38.9 in week 10 against the Giants. Multiple 30-point games throughout the year, high 20s. When it comes to fantasy football, he was as consistent as it gets, basically. I had him last year, and he was very effective. This year, the strength of schedule, not hard, but not necessarily easy. Like, it's ranked at about 19th, so it's in the middle. I do think that was changed because the Eagles were bad last year. The Giants were bad last year defensively. At least I think those will be improved, but it's still Dak Prescott at quarterback number 8. You take him in the first 3 rounds, you're probably going to be annoyed. But you get him after filling out your running backs and your receivers or something like that. He's more than capable of being a good fantasy quarterback for the most part. Mike, and even if we look down the stretch, like during those playoff weeks last year, 18 points in week 16, 17 in week 17, he gave you 21, and then in week 18, he gave you 26. Granted, week 15, he had a bit of a dud, but at the same time, you look at those playoff and some of their strength of schedule. I like Dak Prescott as quarterback number 8 here. They were one of the few teams that didn't really get better this offseason. There's a lot of questions there. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb has to be available if he holds out for the season. All bets are off. But I think you have CeeDee Lamb, you have a top receiver, someone you go 4 stars to. Dak Prescott, he'll be a top 10 fantasy quarterback as he has been every single healthy year of his career. And Zeke is back, so somehow that's got to count for something, right? Like somehow him and Zeke is just good vibes, even when it's bad vibes.
No, I refuse to accept Zeke is going to do anything useful. But I will say, Dak in the regular season, yeah, he's money in the regular season as far as fantasy football goes. There's no doubt about it. I'd be lying to everybody if I'd said I hadn't thought about taking Dak in fantasy football before just to see what might happen. But I will say I've been beaten plenty enough times by him in fantasy football, and as a fan of the Cowboys, that you just sit there and you're just like, this is a bad taste. But I can't deny the fact that he'll get you some solid points. At one point in time in his, every season he goes on a run of 2 to 3 games where he is just the number 1 quarterback you can possibly draft. Unless Lamar goes off on like a 300-yard, 100-yard rushing 3-touchdown game with one of them's rushing. Like, that's the only way that Dak really gets beat. And the fact is,
as we can see, trying to say nice things about Dak Prescott has completely frozen Kelsey's internet as well as turned him into Medusa. Like, just see, maybe you might have gone a little bit too far there. Maybe that was your your limit of saying nice things about Dak, right?
Yeah, I got to stop saying nice things. So no, I mean Dak, yeah, sure. He falls in that category between, like I said about Jordan Love, 8 to 15. All right, I'm cool with it. I'm not going to hate on it yet. If it was top 5, we'd have a problem. But don't worry, at 8, I'm fine with it.
We're not getting in that territory yet, but we are getting in number 7, who was arguably a top 5 fantasy quarterback last year down the stretch. He finished at 11th overall and 10th in per game. We're going to go with the rookie CJ Stroud out of Houston. So last year, as we mentioned, we got a little surprise there. The crowd loves it, but CJ Stroud, outstanding rookie season. As I just mentioned, had some very high scoring games. Strength of schedule this year is about 22nd, so not easy, but we saw last year from CJ Stroud, it didn't have to be easy. He still got it done. He had more than 20 points on, I believe it was 8 occasions, including a 42-point outburst against Tampa Bay and a 31-point explosion against Jacksonville. Very consistent. Missed a couple of games with that concussion and going out against the Jets. That definitely hurt him some. But consistently, he was regularly you can count on about 20 points from him. You add in Stephon Diggs to that mix. Like, say what you want about Stephon Diggs, whether you're a Stephon lover or hater or truther or non-believer, that is still another dynamic weapon to go with Nico Collins and a healthy returning Tank Dell. Joe Mixon's been added to the mix as well. They kept their coaching staff in order too. They did keep Bobby Slowick calling the plays on top of it, so it's another year in the system. I think CJ Stroud, it seems like an incredibly safe bet for him to repeat what he did last year with a little bit extra. So last year he was at about 10 with missing a couple of games. We're presuming all things healthy in this because I don't like to predict too heavily on injuries because that just seems like a false fulfilling prophecy at that point. You predict one person's injury and someone else that you didn't goes down in the injury you predicted plays 17. So we're presuming all things healthy. No reason CJ Stroud's not a top 10 fantasy quarterback next year. There's too much in the right direction. And you play the Colts, Titans, and Jaguars 6 times. Those aren't exactly elite pass defenses. The Colts secondary is a little weak. Jacksonville's pass rush is Josh Allen or bust. And then Tennessee outside of L'Jarius Sneed. We have to wait and see. We have to wait and see. They rebuilt a lot there, so we have to see with them.
Don't tell their defensive tackles that in Tennessee. They'll yell at you. They will yell at everybody on the sideline.
I'm just saying Jeffrey Simmons is awesome, but we need to see how everything gels this year. You got new DC. Everything is flipped on its head in Tennessee. They might be better than expected. They might be worse. We'll talk about that in our AFC South preview in the next month.
Yeah. So, no, I don't hate this CJ Stroud pick either, but I will say this one does concern me more than the other 3. And big reason why is, like we all talk about with rookie quarterbacks going into their second year, will there be a sophomore slump? Historically, there has been, and especially when you post a historic year as a rookie, historically your second year is going to be a fall off compared to your first year because, well, you set records. Obviously, you can't be expected to set records every year. Am I saying don't pick CJ Stroud? Only if you're in a league with me, should you not pick CJ Stroud? So that way I can take CJ Stroud. But no, I mean, if he's there, if you have an opportunity for him, yes. If I imagine in front of these guys, in front of CJ, I'd say the next 5, 6 of these guys that we have left, all 6 of them are taken, then CJ should be there. Maybe even only 4 out of the 6 might be taken. I'm not sure what your list looks like, but I do think that CJ is a great option. And if you feel really ballsy, go ahead. Take them early because you probably won't be disappointed, if you will. But, yeah, I think the big thing, you mentioned Bobby Slowick staying as a play caller. We talked about this going into the offseason. I thought that was a huge part of what the Texans needed to do is keep him because it would make sense for CJ. It would make sense for this future of this offense. And you add Stephon Diggs into this team, and you get everybody back healthy. That receiving core is so deep and so good. And then let's not forget Dalton Schultz is still that dude. I still don't know why Dallas let him go. CJ Stroud has taken full advantage of him. Bobby Slowick throws the perfect routes out there for getting Dalton Schultz out there open, getting the best out of his receiving talent, which is crazy. Not just Schultz, but every one of the receivers out there. I can't wait to see what he does with Stephon Diggs. Because one of the big complaints, and rightfully so, Diggs had in Buffalo was, yeah, they're pretty much sending me on 9s or Diggs or a comeback. Like that's all they're running with them. And I get it. I would understand that if I were a receiver and as many weapons as Stephon Diggs has in his arsenal to only be really kind of like dedicated to running 3 or 4 routes every game, that sucks. That would be really boring, especially with how good he can be. So give CJ Stroud, give Slowick opportunity to try to take advantage of this, and we're going to see the benefits of it. And I imagine, this is one that I definitely don't hate by any means, but I will say there's a slight bit of concern more so than the previous 3, just given the fact he's going into year 2.
Well, risk and concern is the name of the game when it comes to quarterback number 6 on this list. We're sticking in the AFC South, and we are going with the signal caller out of Indianapolis. We are going with Anthony Richardson at quarterback number 6. We do not have a lot to work with here. We do not have a whole lot to know about here. But what we do know is in the 2 games where he played basically just played into the fourth quarter, give or take, he gave you 22 points against Jacksonville and 29 against the Rams. He played a quarter and a half against Houston and gave you 18 points. He averaged about 9 points on the ground last year, which is absolutely insane for a quarterback. He gave you 9 fantasy points just from his rushing last year per game. So what he could do there is absolutely sensational if it can be parlayed throughout the season into a 15-game stretch. This is more of a pick on if we continue what we saw last year as it was going. There's still the injury concern, as we talked about. We won't let injury play too big of a factor into this. But there's also, this is virtually like a rookie year for him. So you got to imagine there will be some ups and downs, especially in the passing game. You will have Jonathan Taylor too. You will have Michael Pittman. You do have weapons as a good team around him. We have to wait and see. But this one's a pick on what we saw last year is an indication of what we see this year, even remotely. Anthony Richardson's going to be he's going to be higher up on this list come next year. This one's a very, very high ceiling. A very, very hopefully you have a backup quarterback like Jordan Love just in case.
Yeah, I like this pick from a boomer bust standpoint. Again, like I just said, everything with CJ Stroud kind of amplified a little bit with Anthony Richardson, just because, like you said, coming off of injury, there's obviously some concerns there. But man, if Gardner Minshew did that with this team, imagine what Anthony Richardson can do with this team if everybody stays healthy for the Colts. And big one out there that I'm going to call out right now, him and Alec Pierce, if they can have an absolutely monster season together. And when I say monster, I'm not talking like Marvin Harrison and Peyton Manning type of monster. I'm talking like a Zach Pascal and Andrew Luck type of season. And, that type. Nothing crazy, but, 800 yards.
Fighting, basically, besides one.
Yeah. Can we get more than just a cameo that pops up for Alec Pierce? Because he's so good, so talented. Anthony Richardson's arm can throw it out of a building. And the only guy out there that on the Colts team that can run past anybody right now really is Alec Pierce. And no offense to the rest of that team, just receiving core was. Yeah, okay.
They had similar 40s, but I get what you're saying.
Add in AD. Obviously, I'm not counting the rookie yet, just because I don't want to. But as far as who's there,
your speed, like you go that way and you go that way in a hurry.
And look, Michael Pittman is one of the best possession and get open receivers in the game as far as get open short. He just uses his body. He's a big body guy. He's like a tight end playing outside. Anybody remembers who Vincent Jackson is? Similar type of build. Maybe not as fast as Vincent Jackson ever was, though.
Not as good down the field. He's very weird. Now he's a X body, but he plays a Z role. It's very weird. Exactly. He's really smooth. He's a very unusual target, which we might talk about later. Yeah. I won't spoil it because we got receivers and we got a long ways to go. So I'll go and speed this up a little bit.
He just needs to stay healthy. That's the big thing with Anthony Richardson.
He's healthy, and anything that we saw last year carries over. We'll see him on this list for a few more years. But these next 5, everyone kind of has an idea of who they are, so I won't spend too much time on them. Number 5, the reigning MVP, we got Lamar Jackson. Long story short, it is Lamar freaking Jackson. That's really all that really needs to be said. After week 1, where they won 25-9, and he just kind of hung out, didn't do much that game, he scored more than 10 points every single game the rest of the week. During the playoff runs, like week 14 through 17, he didn't play week 18. He gave you 32, 19.5, 23, and 36. So you can count on him down the stretch. We know what he can do with his arms and his legs. Strength of schedule is ranked at a 12. I am a little bit worried, like losing Odell, losing some of the offensive linemen. The defense might not be as dominant. They lost so much on the coaching staff. A lot of good players or some offensive linemen. There's a lot missing there, but it's still Lamar freaking Jackson. He still is going to have Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers. I like what Monken did with him too. Derrick Henry's going to steal some of the touchdowns, but Lamar didn't really get rushing touchdowns anyway. He rushes between the 20s. He usually only gives you 6 or 7 rushing touchdowns a year. And a few of them, he's usually breaking from outside the 10-yard line anyway. So give me Lamar Jackson here at number 10. Or sorry, not number 10. At number 5, I think he's still going to be a top 10 next year. Almost guaranteed. It's Lamar Jackson.
I don't hate it. I think he's a little low because I love Lamar. But I think you hit the nail on the head there. He's not really giving you the rushing touchdowns anymore, and especially with the additions to this team, that could be a concern. But yeah, I love Lamar. Everybody getting back healthy, Mark Andrews especially, getting in a few more weapons in that receiving core. So I do love Lamar, but I do think he's a little low. So I'm interested to see who your top 4 is here.
Well, you have an idea of who they are, but the question is going to be what order they go in. But number 4, we're going to have almost the return of Patrick Mahomes. The Potomac Bombs are going to be back this season in full force. Xavier Worthy, Marquise Hollywood Brown, they got speed again, which is what's been lacking their last 2, granted, Super Bowl winning years. It's not like they're missing anything as a team, but Patrick Mahomes in fantasy, you've been missing that. Just those big, huge chunk plays that we haven't seen as often. He's been the death by 1,000 paper cuts quarterback, which is great for them winning those Super Bowls and being undefeated in the playoffs since 2021, 2022 now, something like that, something ridiculous. But for fantasy purposes, I think that speed they have on the outside of those 2, it's going to open things up. I think we're going to see him more consistent offensive explosions. Even last year, you go through his entire season, he had 1 game under 10 points. He more often than not, he was giving you 18 to 20. The problem was that rough stretch from week 13 to week 17 where he didn't score over 17 points. That rough stretch down there, I think, leaves a bit of a sour taste in people's mouth. Some people probably lost in playoff games this year with the speed with Xavier Worthy, but more for me, Marquise Hollywood Brown, a little bit more of an established NFL receiver, is going to give them more options. Marquise does have to make sure he holds on to the ball. He did have some issues with Baltimore with catching it, but I think more often than not, Hollywood Brown's dynamic. Xavier Worthy's the fastest guy in the NFL, statistically speaking, by 4-yard dash times. Travis Kelce's still Travis Kelce. They're going to be fine. Patrick Mahomes, number 4, I think he's back to being that top 5 fantasy quarterback this year with the weapons they've added. Not to mention the strength of schedule. It's 17th, but when it's Patrick, anything that's not 32, you feel good about.
Yeah, I'd arguably say this might be the best Patrick Mahomes we'll see for fantasy football ever in his career.
That's a tough one.
And here's why. Is unlike when he was younger, he knows now he has to play the short game to win long term and win the season and win a trophy, right? He knows he has to play, just simple football sometimes. But like you said, they've missed this last couple of years a real boom threat on the outside since Tyreek left. Well, guess what? They got it back, and they have it in twofold here. So now you have the opportunity to really break open a team as you're dinking and dumping on top of them. And then you take a look at what Tom Brady was the best at it. We talk about game managers, why we love game managers for winning games. And again, if you guys have never known, game managers in this podcast is not a bad thing. Let me be very clear. But game managers mean they know how to win a game and manage the game to win the game. Anyways, Tom Brady was the best at it. Give him Randy Moss. Look what happened. A deep threat that can just break open the game while he still managed the game between every other possession. Now you get Patrick, who knows that now, knows that piece of education that is crucial for the success of a quarterback, and then you add in these weapons. I'm sorry. This one, I really am going to say this one's low for me. I'm going to say Patrick. I have high hopes for Patrick in this season. This is not Patrick Star we're talking about either. This is going to be the Patty that we've all wanted to see, that people were clamoring was coming out of college and needed some work. This is going to be the best Patty that I think we've ever seen.
He might just be, and I won't argue with that part. My concern is fantasy points. Either he might end up sitting some games, or fantasy points. It might not. Him winning games and being outstanding might not conduce to the same fantasy points.
Just calm down on the Travis Kelce throwing touchdown passes situation, or Blake Bell throwing touchdown passes, because you guys have a crazy play inside the 10. Let's not do that this year. Let Patty throw, please.
Well, according to training camp video, they have Kadarius Toney throwing deep passes now after a quadruple pass. So you know what? We're not there's another reason. But number 3, this guy, hopefully the plan is that he doesn't have anyone else throwing touchdown passes from this year after having someone else do it last year. We're bringing back Joe Burrow, quarterback of the Bengals. Last year, we know about the calf injury, a very, very miserable first month for them. Starting week 5, once he was considered to be quote-unquote healthier, he gave you 24, 15, 27, 22, and 22 before going down after 8 points in week 11 against Baltimore. Looking at their team now, I do like what they have with the offensive line. Trent Brown and Orlando Brown at tackles. Then you draft Amarius Mims plus Alex Karras. You basically have to be 6'8", 330 pounds minimum to play tackle for that team with what they're building right now. They have an absolute wall they're working on in front of them. They're going to go 5 out. That's what they do. They basically let Joe have no extra protection, just have 5 receivers out. And basically, they're playing NBA basketball where 5 people, everyone around the 3-point line, which is where he normally seems to thrive. Zach Moss and Chase Brown, I think, will do a good job filling in that Joe Mixon role. I think they do have plenty of receiving options to work there in that regard. Obviously, they have T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. T. Higgins is obviously wants a new deal, deserves it. Jamar Chase wants a new deal, deserves it. But from what they both seem to be there. They both seem to be no issues being there. I also want to mention too, a fun underrated weapon they added was Kelsey's 8th favorite tight end in the NFL, maybe even higher, Mike Gesicki. A little bit of a slow last couple of years since his little breakout in Miami. It's a big body in the red zone. I think he's going to offer a lot of touchdowns. Defensively, I think they're pretty sound as well. So we're say Joe Burrow stays healthy this year. And like in the AFC North, he's going to have to do it himself. He's going to lend himself to a lot of it. It's a hard strength of schedule, but that's just because he plays in the AFC North. All of those teams are going to have that type of strength of schedule, especially going against the Ravens. What they did last year is going to spike a lot of those. So give me Joe Burrow to have a bounce back fantasy season where it's kind of going to have to be on him the way the team is built. It is built for him to play point guard in a 5-out set. James Harden on the Rockets, if you will. Does it win long term? We'll see. Does it score fantasy points in bunches? Well, if he's healthy and everyone's clicking, it sure will.
Yeah, look, I have no real comments on this. I just have a nice little meme comment. And all that is look at this man. Tell me this man is not Eminem incarnate here. This man is about to just beat up every team he plays, score on them, stick his second CD in the other CD drive for your girl, and then go home. If nobody knows what I'm referencing, it's the old, Nick Cannon diss tape from Eminem. So, look, this dude is ready to dominate the AFC North. He got a taste of the Super Bowl. He wants to go back. Nobody's blaming him for that.
Not at all. He's going to have one shot, and I don't think he'll miss his chance to blow. And on top of it, I like Jermaine Burton as the third receiver they brought in, too. I think he's going to be very explosive and very good, along with Charlie Jones. They got a lot of good weapons, and they brought in our boy, Hakeem Butler, that they brought him in also out of the UFL for a tryout. So there is a lot to like there. My biggest question is I just need him to stay healthy for at least 15 to 16 games, really. I just need him to be relatively healthy.
This guy stays healthy. It's okay.
And I believe it as well. I think he's going to have it, but number 2, we know who these next 2 are. Number 2 might be mildly surprising. We got last year's highest scoring fantasy quarterback, Josh Allen. Obviously, we know everything with Josh Allen. What he brings with passing and running the ball is absolutely incredible. Interesting enough, last year, he had 0 games under 10 points. His lowest game was week 1 where he turned the ball over 5 times, and he still got you 12 points. He scored 1 touchdown, but he still managed to give you 12 points because of what he's able to do on the ground through the air with yards as well. So he's consistently a top 5 fantasy quarterback finisher. He finished top 5 more often than he finished outside the top 10. Like he's incredible when it comes to fantasy. This year there will be a bit of a step back. Obviously, you lose Gabe Davis, Stephon Diggs. There's going to be some growing pains with Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman. I love what they have at tight end. If they utilize that 12 personnel, I think there's a lot to be had there. They could create a lot of mismatches with Kincaid as that Travis Kelce roles of tight end / flex H-bag type. There's a lot to be had there, but that's part of the reason I have his number 2 is I don't think he's going to repeat those 15 touchdowns rushing. I think there's going to be a little bit, I'm not even going to say a drop off, but he had 42 touchdowns by himself last year. I think he's going to drop back down to 38. That's the only reason he's really at number 2. So Josh Allen, perennial top 5 fantasy quarterback. We have him at number 2. The problem I think is that he has that 32nd quarterback rank schedule this year. So he has a hard road ahead of him on paper. He'll still find a way to get it done and be in the top 5, though. He's too dynamic, and those true dual threat quarterbacks that are dual threats in the red zone, especially like him. I think he'll still get you 8 to 9 rushing touchdowns. I don't think he'll give you 15.
Yeah, no complaints about Josh Allen. I would say he's maybe a little high given off of his performance last year and the drop off. I don't expect, Isaiah McKenzie to be that big of a boon for him. Obviously, joking with that. Keon Coleman being his number 1 target probably going forward, and Khalil Shakir. But I do think this is one that I'd probably want to lean towards Patty and Lamar jumping this one. But I'm not sure who your number 1 is because there's still 3 guys who I'm looking at and that are not on this list, and I don't know how you're going to fit them in the one spot.
The last thing I want to finish off with Josh Allen, we talked about the drop off from last year. From fantasy perspective, from week 12 to week 18, he gave you 41, 22, 16, 26, 22, and 25. So while eye test statistically is a bit of a drop off, quote unquote, fantasy-wise, he did not miss a beat. He got a lot of people through the playoffs. So
he got me to number two, and he got me to number two in my work league. I am not complaining about Josh Allen's performance, but I'm just saying there's a drop off from the receiver talent more so than anything else.
100%. And if he's able to, there is some talent though, and I like that team. We'll talk about them when we do the preview. I like the Bills more than a lot of people do, but we'll see how much I like them. Number one, we're going to make this one quick and easy. The only other guy to score 15 touchdowns, both of these guys were second only to Christian McCaffrey in rushing touchdowns on the year. We have Jalen Hurts from the Philadelphia Eagles. Last year, he scored 15 rushing touchdowns, 23 passing touchdowns, and that was basically after, what was it, week 10 or so, when they fell off the cliff. I think after week 11 when they lost actually it was after week 12. After they beat Buffalo, they lost 5 of their next 6. He still gave you 20, 24, 23. He gave you a 35 in there. He's consistently going to be high scoring. In the first, before week 10, every single week he was above 22 points except for week 1 against New England, which was a weird slog in week 1. You add in, I think the biggest thing was they fixed the coordinator position. Brian Johnson last year gave them no help. I love the Saquon Barkley addition for Jalen Hurts because he is going to bring so much in the passing game. As soon as Jalen Hurts drops back, let's say the picture is muddy, they roll coverage from too high to single high and he doesn't like it, you can immediately flick that ball to Saquon Barkley in the flatter out of the backfield, and he can get you 8 or 7 yards. Their ability to stay on course this year, I think, is going to be very prevalent. Kelsey's 8th favorite offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, is now taken over in Philadelphia, which I think is going to give them a lot of options. They were one of the 28th team against the blitz last year, and I think even worse when they had 5-man protection. So I don't know. We're gonna go ahead and go with that. I'm gonna go ahead and go with Jalen Hurts here at number 1. I think he's gonna do a lot of what he did last year. Plus, I think he's gonna just be able to stay on course more. It's gonna lend itself to more opportunities. Once again, I don't think the tush push is gonna be their entire offense like it was last year. It's not gonna be tush push, quarterback drop, bomb to AJ Brown. I think there's going to be an actual offense with routes thanks to Kellen Moore. They're gonna have answers, which they didn't have last year, and I think that's gonna be huge for Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I have questions, and it's not about who your guys are on the list because I think that most of the names on this list make sense. I have questions about the guys that are not on this list. I have actually nothing else to add about Jalen Hurts because I think that's fair. But obviously I have strong concerns with the new OC, as I always will. But yeah, Tua Tagovailoa, we got 1.
We might talk about Tua later. I only have 10 spots.
I know, but just thinking Tua. And the one that maybe doesn't surprise me as much given everything else going on in LA, but Justin Herbert.
So I'll answer the Justin Herbert one really quickly. The biggest thing when it came to him was Jim Harbaugh's the coach. I think they're going to be a better team, and Jim Harbaugh's going to be a good quarterback. I just don't know if he's going to get a lot of fantasy points because I think they're going to get in the red zone, and Gus Edwards is going to ram that thing into the end zone. I think if J.K. Dobbins is healthy, he's going to ram that thing into the end zone. I just don't think he's going to have a lot of fantasy points is all. I think he's going to be an awesome quarterback. I just don't. And looking at the receiving core, I don't know if there's a lot of options there. I think Quentin Johnson's going to leave probably 20 fantasy points on the board just from the ball bouncing off his hands again. Sorry, I didn't mean to take that mandatory shot at Quentin Johnson. But I like Justin Herbert. I just don't know about for fantasy purposes this year. I think he's going to be very, very good nonetheless, and the Chargers might be sneaky good. Tua Tagovailoa, weirdly enough, people don't, it's kind of hard to believe, but fantasy-wise, he's not very strong in fantasy. He was about quarterback 14 last year, and he only had 2 games where he scored over 20 points. He had, 3 games. I can't count. So it was 3 games over 22, and I think 4 games over 20. I can't properly count, but he had the 28-point outburst against LA week 1, and then he had the 28-point manhandling of Denver, where they did whatever they wanted. After that, he had 22.5 against Carolina and 22.8 against New England, and didn't cross 20 again after that. So the majority of his fantasy points came in the first 3 weeks, really. I think almost like an eighth of them came in those first 3 games. I can't do math on the fly. But the point is, he's a very boom week-to-week quarterback. Like if you take Anthony Richardson, grab 2 as your backup because you can get him much later. That's a really strong quarterback situation there. And then Justin Herbert, I think he's going to be awesome. I just don't know if the team around him is conducive to high fantasy points. I hope I'm wrong because I want to see Justin Herbert cook. But I don't know if it's very conducive for that, if that makes sense. Perfect. So that's what we have for quarterbacks right now. Next, we're going to move on to the running back situation here quickly. And running back, we're going to cruise through this one a little bit quickly as well. We're going to start right at the bottom. We're going to go with Rachaad White, the running back out of Tampa Bay, a top 10 fantasy running back last year as well. Once again, this is because it is a PPR league. If it was not PPR, he wouldn't be nearly as high because he wasn't as big of a threat rushing. But after their bye week in week 5, he had a rough game against Detroit with only 7 points. And then the rest of the season, every single game he finished with 13 points or more, except for week 17 against New Orleans. He's consistently a threat in the passing game. 3 receiving touchdowns, 6 rushing touchdowns. So it's not like he was a high volume rushing touchdown guy either. He was mostly brought what he did in the passing game with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin more or less dragging people away. So we're going to have Rachaad White at number 10 for Tampa Bay. Their strength of schedule is about 24. It's going to be a rougher week for, it's going to be a rougher season for him and Tampa Bay, I believe. But I still think he is going to have plenty to work with throughout the entire season as well. Next, I'm going to go in to number 9 and 9. We got an oldie, but a goodie. We do have Derrick Henry, the new fun running back in for Baltimore Ravens. What I think is going to be really fun with Derrick Henry is he's not going to have quite the same workload that he's had the previous years. I do think he's going to, maybe in some weeks, he's going to be a little bit lower, but once they get in the red zone, we already kind of talked about it earlier. Lamar doesn't have a whole lot of rushing touchdowns. He mostly runs between the 20s or he breaks one from afar. We saw a Gus Edwards did last year. He scored 13 touchdowns as the backup running back last year. Now you're bringing in Derrick Henry, the quintessential big power back who still had double-digit touchdowns rushing last year with 12 in what would some would consider a quote-unquote down year. He had some some rough weeks where you have like 2 points, 6 points, 2 points, 4 points. That was also with Tennessee, and that team was kind of a mess last year. Now you go to Baltimore, even with some of the losses they've had, that's still the Baltimore freaking Ravens. And you still have Lamar Jackson, who, as soon as you don't pay attention to Lamar Jackson, he's going to break out the back door. So I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that Derrick Henry is going to find his way to double-digit touchdowns. Maybe not that RB1, like that high-end RB1 early first-round guy you take the last few years. You get him in round 2, maybe you have an early pick and you get him on the round 2 to 3 swing. That's a heck of an RB2 / maybe a flex if you go that deep at running back early on. So I like Derrick Henry as a potential running back 9 just for the high volume touchdowns. Next, we're going to go to a quintessential PPR running back here. We're going with Travis Etienne, the running back from Jacksonville. When I look at Travis Etienne, I think that there's a lot that he can do there. I think he's going to continue to be involved in the passing game. Rushing game, he did have 11 touchdowns last year, 1 receiving. He was a top 5 fantasy running back multiple weeks in the top 5 as well. There's a stretch from week 5 to week 8 where he was 1, 2, 4, 5. I think down the stretch it got a little bit rough. He did have a couple of outbursts there in the final couple of weeks, but we're gonna go with Travis Etienne as a top 8 running back. And then number 7, Saquon Barkley with the Eagles. It's Saquon Barkley. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this one. It's Saquon Barkley, and I think with the Eagles he's going to be involved. By the way, Travis Etienne, I forgot to mention the 31st ranked schedule, so that's part of the reason I don't have him a whole lot higher. I think if they had an easier strength of schedule, he might be a little bit higher up on the mark, but we're going to go ahead and put him at 8 just because of what he can do, what he did last year and carry it over as well. Saquon Barkley, as I mentioned it, they have the 9th easiest strength of schedule for running backs. The story with Saquon's always kind of the same. When he's healthy, he's pretty solid. Last year, he had quite a few pretty good games, a 30-point outburst, a 23-point burst. And then in the final week, he had 23 as well. So helped some teams win their playoffs for sure. Consistently in that 10-point range. But the problem with him was the offensive line, health, and the New York Football Giants. None of those are necessarily issues this year besides health. So we're going to go ahead and put Saquon Barkley here at number 7. I think the Eagles have a lot going on there. Next at number 6, we're going to go back to the Buffalo Bills. And I'm going to go with James Cook. I think he was a very sneaky, effective player down the stretch last year. He didn't score a lot of touchdowns, and he didn't have a whole lot of bursts. This is a bit of a projection pick as well. The running back strength of schedule is hard. It is 30th. But as we mentioned, the receiving core isn't exactly loaded. So between him and the tight ends and Josh Allen running, I think it's going to be a very condensed type of offense. It's going to take place between the hashes and the numbers. James Cook down the stretch, he gave you 23 in week 18. 16, he gave you 19 points. Week 14, he gave you 23. And a 30-point burst in week 11. And a handful of 13 to 20-point games in between. While splitting carries, and there was 3 weeks there where he wasn't even really active. He didn't even see the field. So I do think he's going to be a lot more involved. What he brings in the passing game is going to be this difference. I think a very, very lower end of what Alvin Kamara's heyday was as far as in the receiving game. He had 4 receiving touchdowns last year as an afterthought on the offense, really. And that's with Josh Allen monopolizing all the rushing touchdowns, too. So we only had 2 rushing touchdowns. So I think he could be a very, I don't say watered down Alvin Kamara because that sounds insulting, but I think you do a lot of what Alvin did, just not as well as Alvin, but that still is conducive to a potential running back number 6 spot. Running back number 5, we're going with an oldie but a goodie, someone who in 2021 surprised a lot of people and won them some fantasy leagues. We're going to go with the return of Jonathan Taylor. Only played in a handful of games, wasn't very healthy down the last year. When he did play every week except for the first week he was back where Zach Moss took the majority of the carries, he gave you over 10 points. During the playoff run, he gave you 10, 17, and 28. He had a few stretches in there with 15 and 21 as well. Strength of schedule is rough at 26. You put Anthony Richardson next to him, it's going to make his job a whole lot easier. I think the dynamicism that's going to be in that backfield's going to open it up a lot for Jonathan Taylor as well, who's going to be involved in the passing game. We know what he's capable of doing if he could just stay healthy, and that offensive line got reinvigorated last year, so I think that's going to play a part in it as well. Number 4, this one's going to probably catch a little bit more heat, but I'm very high on it. We're going with Jahmyr Gibbs out of Detroit. I think Jahmyr Gibbs, this is going to be kind of the year where there it is. I've been waiting for that one as well. Either it's a good sign or a bad sign, but I think we're going to see Jahmyr Gibbs have a little bit of a breakout this year. We saw it a lot last year as well in those PPR leagues, especially. Took him a while to get him involved in the passing game they truly wanted. In weeks 17 and 18, he didn't see a lot of burn, only 5 and 9 points. But the weeks before that, in 14 through 16, he gave you 17, 25, and 24. In weeks 10, 11, and 12, he gave you 26 and 21. Week 7 and 8, he gave you 27 and 30. So he's very capable of going absolutely nuclear. I think after what they saw last year, Detroit's going to make him the feature back with David Montgomery is just a touchdown horde. So we'll go with Jahmyr Gibbs at number 4. And on top of that, it's the Lions' offensive line, too. Does anyone here think their offensive line is going to take that much of a step back, if at all? That all the weapons on there, I don't see Detroit missing a beat next year. 23rd as far as running back strength of schedule, but nonetheless, I still think he's going to be fine. The downside is going to be David Montgomery stealing some touchdowns from him, but he'll be fine. I mean, like he'll be just fine. Next, number 3, we got the guy I had on every single team last year. It felt like who won me a league and at the same time lost me a handful of weeks here and there. But we're going with Bijan Robinson out of Atlanta for no other reason than Arthur Smith is gone, so he's going to get the ball. That could be case shut by itself as it is. But even despite the Arthur Smith conundrum, he finished the year with 19, 12, and 26. So he was strong down the playoff run. Consistently over 10 points. He had a few duds in there, obviously. We all remember week 7 against Tampa where he had 1 carry for 3 yards. At least I remember, and it still hurts. But other than that, he consistently finished in a solid spot. And I think this year with the new offensive coordinator bringing in the Ram system, he's going to finish up there as well. And the running back strength of schedule, 6th, is very, very easy. Number 2, another surprise here. We're going to go with the reigning running back defending crown and fantasy football darling, Christian McCaffrey at number 2. Obviously, what he did last year was absolutely sensational. For no other real reason here than what are the chances he's going to do it again? Like no one is for running back has been the back-to-back scoring champion since Todd Gurley, and everyone knows how long ago that was. So I think he's still going to be awesome. I don't know if he's going to give you 22 all-purpose touchdowns and 1,800 all-purpose yards. Sorry, something like that. I don't think he's going to be quite the same, but I think he's still going to be awesome. He's still a top 5 pick. And then number 1, we're going to go with Breece Hall, the running back from the New York Jets. Last year, he was a top 5 scoring running back, even with Zach Wilson at quarterback, and then coming off that ACL injury. And kind of at first, they were like, are we going to split carries with him and Dalvin? How are we going to use him? What's the plan here? There was no plan, and he still produced the whole year. After the first month, he scored 28 in week 5, and then the rest of the way, he consistently gave you over 10 to 20 points, even had a 43-point explosion against Washington in week 16, 27 in week 17, then 29 in week 18. It is PPRs where he is effective. In a non-PPR league, he will not be quite as effective. He only does have 5 rushing touchdowns and had 4 receiving. He had 95 targets, though, as a running back. Their offense was, quick, get the ball to Breece Hall. And I think a little bit of that is going to continue this year as well with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. Because what's Aaron Rodgers like to do? Throw the ball to Aaron Jones. That's what he did a lot in Green Bay. We all remember what Aaron Jones did in 2019 with 19 touchdowns. I think Breece Hall can emulate a lot of that where Garrett Wilson's not open. Mike Williams is injured down the field. All right, check it down to Breece Hall. I think whether it's Aaron Rodgers or now Tyrod Taylor, it's not Zach Wilson, so it's an upgrade automatically. So we're going to go Breece Hall as running back 1, and I think could be the running back that I think he could be the one who wins somebody in fantasy, who picks them at like 5 or 6, he ends up being the leading scorer. I think Jonathan Taylor 2 years ago, or CMC last year, who a lot of people remember, wasn't always going top 5. Last year, nobody wanted to take a running back in the top 5.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate it. This list is interesting, though, because there's a couple pieces I think I'd maybe consider it a little bit higher, Derrick Henry being one of them just because of touchdowns. I don't think he's going to lose a lot of touchdowns, so I think he does need to be a little bit higher here. Plus, he has a better offensive line, and literally the Ravens do exactly what Derrick Henry does well, which is block up the middle well. Even though I've called him a not interior running back at times because, well, he doesn't run well in between the guards. But that's also because he didn't have 2 good guards and a good center at the same time. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think that may be the surprise for some folks. I don't agree. I agree more with you than anything. I think he's a top 5 running back in this class. And what we have to draft for fantasy football right now, it makes a lot of sense. The one I'm looking at, and it's Christian McCaffrey. And there's nothing against Christian McCaffrey. I have, again, helped me get to a number 2 position in my work league, made me not a laughing stock of that. I appreciate that. Appreciate you, CMC. But as you said, once you lead the league in rushing, you usually don't fare well very, very well the next year. Actually, in most cases, you finish outside of the top 5 in rushing the next year. What saves CMC, and also why I still don't want to put him in the top 3, is the receiving category, because there's a lot of balls that need to go around in San Francisco to keep everybody happy, because we don't even know if one of their receivers is going to be there. But yeah, I think CMC is the big question for me here as far as where he is. I understand why he is there, because honestly, multi-talented is a understatement for Christian McCaffrey. And Breece Hall at number 1. I don't know if there's another guy I would want to put at the top of this list. I love Breece Hall. I'm a big Breece Hall fan. He makes a lot of sense. And Bijan as well in that top 3, I agree with. So yeah, I mean, big one here, CMC. That's the only question I have. I have really no complaints across the board everywhere else. Except for maybe Josh Jacobs potentially getting in this top 10. He's the only one I could see maybe on the outside looking in right now as that Rachaad White spot. But I get why White's in there because, like you said, PPR league. Got to make a spot for them.
And he doesn't really have to split the ball with anybody else.
Yeah.
I think Josh Jacobs got to split it with A.J. Dillon and Marshawn Lloyd. It's going to be Rachaad White in Tampa Bay. It's going to be Mike Evans at the sideline, Chris Godwin in the slot, Rachaad White. That's kind of their bread and butter. But I think what's fun about this year is running back position is back, I think. Last year, we talked about this at the Fantasy Football Expo. There was not a lot of faith in running backs. Like the top 3 picks we were talking with people, they wanted Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Travis Kelce. We were looking at Tyreek Hill. We were looking at receivers, which still might be the case this year. But like last year in one of our leagues, there was 3 running backs that went in the first round in a 10-man league. This year, I think it's fair to say you could put 5 in the first round comfortably, especially with receiver depth as well. So this take a look at what we have for the top 10 running backs. It won't shake out this way, but this is kind of what I'm feeling here. Another sneaky one could be Alvin Kamara, just because I'm worried about how they're going to use him, and I'm worried about the explosion factor, but there's options for him to catch the ball. But we're going to go ahead and move on now to the receivers, which is going to be a little bit fun. And the reason we talk about Alvin Kamara is we're going to lead the receivers off with a New Orleans Saint. That is none other than Chris Olave himself. This one I wrestled with a lot because last year he was very boomer bust. There would be weeks where he gave you 1.4, then he gave you 19 to 20. He only had 2 weeks, over 20 points last year. I think that what I thought was interesting, there's a stat where he had the most yards left on the field, whether it's from an inaccurate ball or a penalty of anyone last year. The most unrecognized yards, only 5 touchdowns. They did bring in the receiver coach that coaches Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill, their personal coach, to come in there. And they brought in Clint Kubiak as the offense coordinator. Anyone remembers what the Kubiak offenses were like back in the day? Gary Kubiak with the Texans, what he did with Andre Johnson. Number 1 receivers are going to get the ball, and that's going to be Chris Olave in this spot. Not to mention they have the 22nd strength of schedule for receivers, so not good, not bad. But who else is going to take targets from him? Maybe a little Alvin Kamara, Rashid Shaheed occasionally get a bomb, but this feels very similar to what we saw last year with DJ Moore with the Bears. A number 1 receiver and a quarterback who will sometimes just put the ball out there. And I think we're going to see a lot of Chris Olave. He'll just be out there somewhere. So they'll find a way to get him the ball. Chris Olave at number 10. Number 9, the epitome of all reliable when it comes to fantasy football receivers. We are going with Mike Evans. Not 1,000 yards, basically clock it in every single year. At double-digit touchdowns, clock it in as well, too. It's money in the bank every single time. So we're going to go with We're going to go with, excuse me, Mike Evans there at number 9 for no other reason than you are guaranteed to get that. Basically, you're assured to get that. Strength of schedule is about 14th, so pretty much right in the middle. Several games where he finished in the top 10 for receivers as well. A few of them even in the top 5. So it's just he's the safest pick, and so there's a little bit of he might not boom quite as much as some of the higher guys, but he won't. He very rarely will bust. He only had a couple games where he's even under 10 points. I think him and Baker have a very good rapport. So we're going to go ahead and go with old reliable Mike Evans at number 9. Speaking of old reliable, number 8, we're going with Devontae Adams, the usual consensus number 1 receiver. I think right now with the quarterback issues, Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, etc., we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. He's going to slip down to number 8. Still, last year, despite everything, he still finished as a top 10 fantasy receiver. He had a 40-point outburst, a 38-point outburst, multiple 20-point games. He did have some duds in there because the Raiders were an absolute mess. That being said, he's still going to get his targets. He's still at 175 targets, 103 catches, 1,100 yards, and 8 touchdowns. He's still Devontae freaking Adams. So until he falls off the cliff, he's going to be up here. And one thing we all know about Gardner Minshew, regardless of what he does, he's going to put that ball up there. Whoever the number 1 receiver is up the sideline, when in doubt, he will put the ball up there for him. Strength of schedule is rough. It's at 24, so I think this is a riskier one in the case of hopefully you have a good number receiver too. He'd be really good as that second swing pick. If you get one of these top 5 guys and then pair him with Devontae, I think that'll help cushion it a little bit. That being said, it's still Devontae Adams. Until the wheels fall off, he's on there. Next up, we're going to go with number 7. We're going to go with Kelsey's not even in his top 10 favorite, not even his top 20 favorite receivers, probably. We're going to go with A.J. Brown right out of the Philadelphia. I just said favorites because he's an Eagle. That's my only reasoning. But we're going with A.J. Brown, Chipotle's favorite receiver himself. Last year, a top 5 receiver throughout the year. He had such an explosive run from week 3 to week 9 where he gave you 22, 38, 18, 20, 30, 33, and 20. Had a rough week 11 against Kansas City. Then down the stretch was a little bit rough. Part of that was the Eagles just imploded as a whole. So I think A.J. Brown's still going to be that electric X receiver for him. I do think, too, the strength of schedule is 28th, so it is a rough strength of schedule. I think the Eagles are going to be so much better, though, with Kellen Moore. Saquon Barkley, I think Jalen Hurts is going to be better. I think there's going to be a lot to be said about the changes they make offensively. Last year, their blitz counter was, oh, crap, he out there somewhere. They did not have a blitz counter whatsoever. This year, I think they will have that, which will open up a lot more opportunities. And A.J. Brown still had back-to-back 1,400-yard seasons, 158 targets, 7 touchdowns. He's going to get his regardless. Like, he's one of those guys. He's just going to get his regardless. You can pencil that in as well. Number 6, this guy unfortunately let a lot of people's fantasy teams down last year through absolutely no fault of his own whatsoever. We were going with Garrett Wilson, the young star receiver from the Jets. And I say star because I think this is going to be his breakout year. Last year, obviously, Aaron Rodgers going down in 38 seconds or whatever it was. Didn't really get a chance to see Garrett Wilson come onto the scene with a true bona fide quarterback. He had the Zach Wilson experience throughout. Still more often than not would give you double-digit points. He did have quite a few of those games where it'd be like 5 points, 9 points, but we know what that was like with the Zach Wilson effect. You bring in Aaron Rodgers, I think he's going to be able to build off of his 1,000 yards, and he only had the 3 touchdowns. That's what really killed him last year in fantasy. He might do 3 touchdowns in one game with Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball. We saw what Aaron did with Devontae. I think we're going to see a lot of that with Garrett Wilson, his ability to explode in and out of routes. Strength of schedule, they had the 7th easiest strength of schedule for receivers, and he had 168 targets last year. Only caught 95 of them because how many of those targets did Zach Wilson airmail, undermail, or throw right into the defender's head? So I'm going to say a lot of those targets will stay the same, but those catches and everything else is going to go up now that you have presumably Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball. If not, Tyrod Taylor is the backup quarterback, and that is a significant upgrade in itself. So number 5, I hate putting him at number 5 because he's awesome. We're going with Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was absolutely incredible last year, an absolute receptions machine. This is the guy that PPR was built for. He's going to get the ball and get it in large droves. He was ranked receiver number 9 last year. Almost every single week, he had double-digit points. He had 1 week where he had 5. Every other week, he was double digits, including a couple 25 to 30s. During the playoff run, he gave you 24, 28, 22, and 27 down the stretch. He was absolutely incredible. Touchdown-wise, he actually gave you 10 touchdowns and 1,500 yards. I think those will lower just a little bit. I think with all the weapons they have in team, the Lions aren't sneaking up on anybody this year. Everyone is watching the Lions. So I think he's still going to give you the 100-plus catches. He's still Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's still going to give you I think it's going to be closer to 1,200 yards and maybe 8 touchdowns. So it's a slight step back because the lines are going to be explosive. Everybody's going to eat on that team. It's going to be a feast for everybody. So Amon-Ra is going to take a slight step back statistically, but he's still going to be awesome. And his average draft position is about 5 or 6, so you're getting him about in the right spot. You might even get somebody who lets him slip a little bit. If you get him in the later part of the first round at like 8 or 9, you're getting an absolute steal. So Amon-Ra St. Brown there. Next up, we're going at number 4. This one concerns me, but I can't in good conscience put him any lower. We got Mr. J. Jettas himself, Justin Jefferson. Last year, missing, 8 games? About 8 games, he gave you 68 catches for 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. With Grant, and he had a handful of those with Kirk Cousins, but the final 5 games, he did it without Kirk Cousins. In the playoff stretch, he gave you 15, 26, 11, and 36. I am worried about the Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy factor. It's still Justin Jefferson. He's still shown the ability to get it done consistently. They have the 16th strength of schedule, so I think I have a hard time seeing him really falling off much further. I think he could very easily, if Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy are even 75% of what Kirk Cousins and Jay Jettas were, you're going to have a top 5 4 receiver. He is just that good. Next up, number 3, we have last year's leading receiver and Kelsey's favorite receiver on this list who need to get paid real quick, fast, in a hurry. We have CeeDee Lamb. The only reason he's probably not 1 or 2 is because, no receivers repeated as far as back-to-back receiver number 1s in fantasy since Antonio Brown. Anyone who's paid attention to Antonio Brown knows how long ago that really was. And last year, 181 targets, 135 catches, 1,750 yards, 12 touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns, and 113 rushing yards. That's just an incredible thing to try and follow up. I think he's still going to be awesome, but it's probably going to be a little bit, I'd imagine it's going to be closer to 110 catches, 1,400 yards, maybe 9 to 10 total touchdowns. I do think the Cowboys offense last year was so CD-centric, and teams found that out down the stretch, the Packers especially figure out ways to not stop him, but mitigate it and make Dak have to go through, and that makes it more difficult. So number 2, we're going to move on to number 2. Now, by the way, CeeDee Lamb, they have the 20th receiver rank schedule, so it's not easy, but it's not hard. They have the NFC East. He's still fine. You still take him in the top 5 if he's there. Number 2, we got Tyreek Hill. This one's really, really easy. It's Tyreek Hill. Last year, if he didn't get hurt, he arguably could have been the receiver 1. He was on an incredible pace for 2,000 yards. He started out the season. He had 1 game under 15 points in the first 8 weeks. Then after that, he from week 11 to week 18, he had 30, 25, 32, 10, 18, 13, and 21. And that was with getting hurt in one of those games as well. 27th ranked schedule, very difficult. Dolphins, what they will do better than anybody else is once they have a chance to run it up, they will run it up in abundance, and Tyreek Hill will benefit from that. And if you're in leagues like the ones Kelsey and I play in, where you get extra points for 40-yard touchdowns, 50-yard touchdowns, that's where Tyreek Hill is a complete difference maker. And that's going to take us now into receiver number 1. Unfortunately, this man, a lot of people took him number 1 overall last year, and it did not quite work out. But it was not due to any fault of his own. We got Jamar Chase from Cincinnati. I think it's a bounce-back year. Joe Burrow, I presume, will be healthy. We saw Jake Browning actually play and get going down the stretch. Last year, Jamar Chase, it was considered a quote-unquote disappointing season. He finished with 100 catches, a career high, 1,200 yards, and 7 touchdowns. So for a disappointing season and still finishing as a top 11 receiver, that will do. When Joe Burrow was healthy, during that, he had games of 26, 14, 52, 14, and 25. So he was and 23. So he was absolutely sensational. Even with Jake Browning, he had a couple double digits and a 31-point outburst. It's a little risky. There's a little concerns, but I think he's going to get a lot more targets and receptions this year. So I don't think he'll be as dependent on the boom plays. We saw it last year. They got him involved a lot more, 145 targets and 100 catches. So we're going with Jamar Chase at number 1. A little risky, but I think if Joe Burrow's mostly healthy, this seems very, very doable. And he's trying to get paid too. So he's going to come out and bring his A game every single week. So give me Jamar Chase at number 1 for receivers. A bounce back year after a disappointing, there's finger quotes for those listening on audio, last year where he had 100 catches at 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. The strength of schedule is hard. It is 31. So it's not very friendly for receivers, but you also have T8. As a deep squad, and I think that 31's slightly misleading because of how good the Ravens were last year.
Yeah, I will say Jamar's kind of benefiting a little bit because Taj Boyd no longer there. So that is going to help a little bit because if we all watch the Bengals, I know we have. Burrow does like to throw to Taj Boyd, and it was kind of a pick your own poison at one point in time with that trio of receivers. Again, there's still quality there in Cincinnati, but it is Jamar Chase, then T. Higgins, and then everybody else. And again, nothing wrong with that, but that's just what it is. Tyreek at 2 makes a lot of sense. Really relying on Tua just to be healthy, because we all know if Tua's not there, there's not a lot of beyond that. And if Jalen's healthy as well, Tyreek succeeds. Those are just two important pieces. CeeDee Lamb, just got to rely on Dak. Plain and simple. Justin Jefferson, I have a hard time with this one because I also agree Justin Jefferson needs to be here from talent standpoint. But J.J. McCarthy.
Or Sam Darnold, which is not much better.
Yes. Yeah, any one of the above. This is not Sam in California. This is not sunny sunshine Sam anymore. This is Great White North Sam, and I don't know how well he does in the cold. Amon-Ra St. Brown, speaking of somebody who is just honestly cold. Yeah, ice cold in those veins. Amon-Ra St. Brown, big fan, obviously. I am a big supporter here. I would say he needs to be higher. Personal opinion here, but you make good points of why he's at 5. I am not going to discount any of that. So I'm all right. I'll accept 5 for a preseason fantasy football ranking.
So good that 5 feels like an insult, which is still
it does.
First round pick and probably the 5th overall pick in most drafts.
Yeah, if you wonder why I'm becoming a bigger Amon-Ra St. Brown fan, just go watch the Receiver documentary on Netflix. You'll understand. Garrett Wilson, he just needs to make sure he doesn't zag when he's supposed to zig, or he zags when he's supposed to. I don't know. I don't get any more. I've run out of that entire energy to deal with the Jets. AJ Brown, I hope you lose receptions to Devontae Smith. I digress. I've always loved having Devontae Smith in the situation with AJ Brown. If you can double up on both of them, you have a top 10 receiver in one of them every week, guaranteed. That's just how that offense works. We had Jalen number 1 there on the other side. Devontae just needs Aiden or whoever's going to play quarterback, Gardner, somebody to just throw him the ball, give him an opportunity. He's going to be open. Mike Evans chalking up now, another 1,000 yards, another 8 touchdowns. Just going to be what he does.
Death taxes.
Yeah, Chris Olave, who is going to compete with him? I don't know. I love this one at number 10. So I don't know if there's any receiver that really is missing there. Everybody's going to complain and be like, oh, where's the Niners at? Honestly, we don't know where the Niners are, if they're even going to be in San Francisco come the start of the season. And yes, I did say Niners, not just one Niner, 2 Niners. So yeah, I don't disagree with this. And obviously DK is not on here. That's going to raise some flags. But again, question is, how successful is that offense going to be? Will JSN step into that offense and take catches away? We don't know yet.
Spoiler alert, yes.
Yes. Yeah, spoiler alert, it will happen. And then, everybody else, Denver, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, those guys, too many question marks. Amari Cooper, that offense has just got to be clicking. We don't know where they're at. So, I like this list top to bottom. Big one, though, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson. I just don't know with the two of them, just because you have so much relying on whatever quarterback's playing for JJ. And with Amon-Ra, you just have to make sure he gets touches because there's a lot of mouths to feed there.
There's a lot of mouths to feed, and I'm worried he won't get as many touchdowns. I think his touchdowns will kind of go down a little bit. I also want to add in the amount of receivers that could have made this list in that, DJ Moore, Michael Pittman, Nico Collins. You can go on and on.
Keenan Allen. I mean,
Marvin Harrison Jr. Even who else is going to get the ball there?
No, we are okay. I would there'd be a flag thrown on the play if Marvin Harrison Jr. was on this list. I'm sorry. I don't hate on Marvin, but I will not put a rookie on a top 10 fantasy football list yet.
I'm saying his average draft position is showing he's awfully close to this because he's going real early in a lot. I'm gonna
let everybody take him because I don't trust everything else around Kyler and Marv. Everything else besides those two, I don't trust for that team.
I also want to add in Puka Nacua. I didn't put on here because I think he's awesome. I think he's going to be in that same category as DJ Moore and those guys. I think he's not going to repeat quite what he did last year. He's still going to be awesome. Cooper Kupp's going to be healthy, and he's going to take some of that too. When they both were on the field, Puka didn't Puka quite as much. Puka because there was room to Puka. And yes, I'm turning it into a verb now. I think he's still going to Puka. He's just not going to Puka.
Would it be Pukaing or would it be Nakuing?
He's going to Puka. He's just not going to Nakua.
I think Puka's the bad and Nakua's the good. I think that's what we're going with.
He won't Puka a whole lot, and he just won't quite Nakua as much. However you want to put it. He's going to be plenty good. I just think I don't think he's going to quite repeat what he did last year. That's why I have him in that same category as DJ Moore, Michael Pittman, and all those guys just on the outside of this look. Like, you can get some really good receivers in that rounds 3, 4, 5 range. There's a lot of good talent to go there. Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, on and on and on. But we got a lot with receivers. Receivers are probably going to go 3 of the top 5 picks in a lot of leagues.
And they might change next week.
They just might. We'll stick around for the Fantasy Football Expo. We'll see how many people think I'm stupid. There will be plenty of them, I'm sure. We're going to go to tight ends now. We're going to go with the big pass catchers. And I don't want to spend quite as much time here because tight ends it's a little messy sometimes too, because you really have no idea what you're getting year to year. So we're going to start out at number 10. We're going to go with Kelsey's boy, Jake Ferguson of the Cowboys. This one's just kind of rough because I wanted to put TJ Hawkinson here, but with the injury, I don't know what to do with it. So at this point, I felt like Jake Ferguson is going to get a fair amount of targets to move the chains targets. He'll have some of those really good weeks where he'll give you 10, 15. He even gave you 20 once last year. I like him in Dallas. It's him and CeeDee Lamb at this point. Like, those are going to be where the target shares are. Number 9, we are doing this again for the one, by the way, for Jake Ferguson, as far as tight end strength of schedule, it's 31. So it's a tread lightly if this is the direction you go. This is you drafted everything but tight end and you're kind of worried here in the later rounds. Number 9, we're doing this again for the 4th year in a row. I will not be bent. I will be bent, but I will not be broken. We're putting Kyle Pitts in the top 10. Arthur Smith is gone. Kyle Pitts is 23 years old, so he's still young. I don't think he's shot. He's not washed. He's not finished. He's still in multiple weeks finished as tight end 3, tight end 8, and tight end 7 last year, despite everything. The problem was those weeks where he gave you 3 points, 4 points, 4 points, 1.5, etc. He had 90 targets for 660 yards, 3 touchdowns last year, 53 receptions. Not necessarily great. Strength of schedule is 14th. It's dead in the middle. Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix. I don't care which one they play. It is a significant upgrade over what Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke were doing there last year. That was abysmal. This goes for everybody. You could put Drake London in that receiver category from the last one, and those ones right outside the top 10. Bijan, everyone's going to be so much better, whether it's Kirk or Penix. They did bring in, his name eludes me, he came with Raheem Morris from the Rams to be the offensive coordinator. What did the Rams do that annoyed fantasy owners more than anything? Score touchdowns with Tyler Higbee. For people who didn't have Tyler Higbee or didn't play Tyler Higbee, I think Kyle Pitts is going to get a lot of those points this year. And they're talking about splitting him out as a receiver in a lot of situations. Kyle Pitts, fade route touchdowns. Him and Drake London, book it. I think Kyle Pitts gives you 7+ touchdowns. And he finally is kind of worth that pick this year. I think finally they find he doesn't hurt us anymore. He can hurt us no more. The ghost of Arthur Smith is out of there. Next up at number 8, we're going with the surprise to me with how good he was last year. We're going with Evan Ingram. Multiple times, almost every single week. 1, 2, 3, 4. He had 5 weeks where he didn't finish in the top 10. Every other week he finished in the top 10, including finishing number 1 twice in the last 5 weeks. So during a playoff run, he gave you 32, 7, 17, 12, 24. So as far as tight ends go, where it's not a whole lot of boom, he provided a lot of options. 114 receptions, 960 yards. Only the 4 touchdowns. I don't know if that'll go up, but the amount of targets he will get with Trevor Lawrence in that offense, it's a very, very condensed passing offense because they didn't have a lot of down the field threats. We'll see if that changes this year, and if that does, I think Evan Ingram will have more space to work with. Either way, Evan Ingram at number 8. Number 7, Kelsey's favorite tight end on this list besides George Kittle, we got David Njoku. None other than David Njoku himself, chief out of Cleveland. He had 0 touchdowns through the first 7 weeks of the season, and it was kind of rough. But then once Joe Flacco came in, and I'm joking, not just because of Joe Flacco, but because there was a few games with Deshaun, a few games in there with PJ Walker and everyone else who played basically. But he had several weeks. He had 6 touchdowns in those final handful of weeks. Finished with 81 catches, 880 yards, 6 touchdowns, which was tied for second amongst all tight ends. He also had 123 targets. So there was a lot of missed opportunities there, which I think could be made up for next year. I think he finally had a little bit of that breakout that everyone has been looking for years. He's had down the stretch to 27, 26, 16, and 17. He was consistent down the stretch. Tight end 2, 2, 4, and 3. For tight ends, the tight end strength of schedule is 13. The Browns are loaded, whether it's Deshaun or Jameis Winston. just find David Njoku. It's very, very simple. 85 is open. Like Chad Ochocinco told us this for years. Just throw the ball to 85. And then from there, you'll be able to find Amari Cooper, et cetera, from there as well. So it seems very simple. Just get David Njoku the ball. And I think they will do that a lot more this year, building off of what he did last year. Next up on the list, this one hurts because he's really better than this. My problem is there's too many weeks they don't get him the ball. We have George Kittle. He's arguably a top 3 tight end in the game, but for fantasy goes, he's also a top 5 fantasy scoring tight end. The problem is he scores 28 points against the Cowboys in week 5, and then he scores 1.1 the next week against Cleveland, 1 catch for 2 yards. The problem is the roller coaster ride because of how many mouths to feed there are with the 49ers and how Kittle is an extended offensive lineman on too many series. He's incredible, especially if you get him in like round 8, 9. You fill out your running backs, receivers, and everything else first. Then you snag him. That's when he can get very dangerous and can win you some games. I love George Kittle. He would be higher if it was an offense that even remotely consistently tried to feature him instead of just occasionally doing it when everybody else is annoyed from the 1.1 weeks. Number 5, we have Dalton Kincaid. Buffalo is very, we're going to say limited on weapons, I think is a fair way to put it. There is, outside of Dalton Kincaid, there is not a whole lot of options there. He was inconsistent a little bit last year as a rookie. He had a nice stretch from week 7 to week 11 where he gave you 16, 17 and a half, 16, 16 and 11. The last 2 weeks, he gave you 13 and 15. Then there's just a handful of duds in there too. Like he had a 0.1 against the Cowboys, where that was basically the James Cook and Josh Allen show. Against the Chargers, he had 2 points there. So I think there is a little bit of worry there, but at the tight end spot, you will take those big games at the expense of the smaller games, just because tight end is not necessarily you don't see as many consistent like 15, 12 point games, anything like that. So we're going to go ahead and take Dalton Kincaid at number 5, who I think is going to get a lot more opportunities. Strength of schedule, it's 32nd. So it's a rough strength of schedule for the Bills, but somebody has to get the targets, and who better than Dalton Kincaid? Next up, we got all reliable number 4, Mark Andrews. Honestly, he probably could be higher on this list. I'm coming off the ankle injury as well. He was outstanding when he was there last year. The handful of games where he got injured, he gave you 25, 12, 11, 22, 14, and 17. Then he had a 6-point game, and then he had 4 in the game that he got injured in. Strength of schedule is 18. It is still Mark Andrews. He's still going to be fine. I think he won't have as big of a target share because I think they're going to run the ball a little bit more with Derrick Henry and Lamar. And I think Zay Flowers is going to emerge as well. So number 4, Mark Andrews. Number 3, we talked about the frisky Cardinals earlier, and we're going to go back to them. We're going to go with a little bit of a fantasy darling down the stretch that saved a lot of people's seasons. We're going to go with Trey McBride for the Arizona Cardinals. Finished in the top 5, I believe, for tight ends last year as well. The first month and a half or so of the season, not very good. It wasn't until about week 8 he finally started the breakout, where he had a 25-point game against the Ravens. Then down the stretch in the final, once Kyler Murray came back, he gave you 22, 9, 13, 23, 29, 11, and 12 and a half. So once Kyler Murray got into the fray, Trey McBride was absolutely awesome. We mentioned they have Marvin Harrison Jr. and then kind of Zay Jones a little bit some weeks. I think Trey McBride's going to find a lot of open space on that team. I think he really came on strong, and Kyler Murray found him a lot. And he has the number 1 easiest strength of schedule for a tight end. So on paper, there is going to be a lot of opportunities for him to feast in that offense as well. Number 2, I'm going to keep this really quick and simple. It is Travis Kelce. And my reasoning is because he is Travis Kelce. Even last year in a quote unquote down year, he was, I think, tight end 3. And the strength of a schedule is 11 this year. Almost 1,000 yards last year. He plays the last week of the season. He gets 1,000 yards. So Travis Kelce at number 2, quick and easy. Number 1, no surprise, we were going with Sam Laporta. I know we kind of just talked about there is a lot of mouths to feed in Detroit. What makes Sam Laporta a little bit different, I believe, is while he was 5th in targets and 5th in receptions among tight ends, he was number 1 in touchdowns at 10. The next closest was a 3-way tie at 6. And I think with Detroit, he's still going to have those opportunities because in the red zone, a lot of the passing does revolve around Sam Laporta and the receiving ability of the tight end. So I think he can replicate the 10 touchdowns, 86 catches, 180 yards. I think he can do a lot of the same thing because he was not the focal point of the offense. He was basically a touchdown scorer and a chain mover, which is exactly what they need. That I don't think they'll see a lot of drop off there. So we're still going to have Sam Laporta at number 1. When you score the most touchdowns by a tight end by a surprisingly decent margin of 4, I'm going to keep him at 1 until proven otherwise. And I think year 2 tight ends tend to take a little bit longer to get going. They don't normally explode as rookies. And I think he exploded as a rookie, which means he can only go up from here. So give me Sam Laporta usurping the number 1 tight end spot for now.
Yeah, look, Sam Laporta carried my team to a fantasy football number 2 finish. Yeah, and I had Mark Andrews on that team, and I had to figure out who I was going to play every week. That was a pain in my tail. Yeah, exactly. I will say there is one name that's missing from this list that I think could easily slide in here, and I might drop number 8 off this list, and that's Dalton Schultz.
If there wasn't so many mouths to feed, I'm in the same boat with you. It was him, Jake Ferguson. I almost put Dalton Schultz because I was thinking he was a Cowboy in my head because that's what I remember him for.
If he was still a Cowboy, he'd be number 5 on this list. I'm sorry, there's no taking that away because he was Dak's favorite target. But he is also C.J. Stroud's number 2 target. And I think that's part of my theory of trying to put him up here is because in that offense, and especially as we talked about with C.J. Stroud, you're getting in year 2, you're getting that sophomore slump realm. You do get a little concerned about what he's going to do if his weapons in Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins are covered up mid to deep down the field. Who's going to bail him out? Well, is it going to be Joe Mixon? Probably not. Is it going to be Dalton Schultz? Absolutely. Also, in the end zone, I'm sorry, I'm not running Tank Dell on any sort of route that's going to get him hurt.
Please don't make him a fullback. Please don't make him a fullback again.
I want to see Dalton Schultz in the end zone more often than previous, and kind of Dallas-esque in the way they got him in the end zone, because that's really where he excels. Is from the 10 in is like, good luck trying to stop him, because he is agile enough to keep up with, get past any linebacker that's guarding him and any really safety that's going to guard him, because you're going to have to put a safety on him when you have the weapons that they have. You don't have any choice, or you're going to have to stick a linebacker and hope for the best, which is never a good plan when you're going against C.J. Stroud. So yeah, I do think, out of anybody on this list that I would say I take off, I'm taking Evan Ingram. I have my own issues with Evan Ingram. The dude can barely catch passes that are right at his hands, but he can make the tough catches, which is the stupidest thing I've ever seen for tight end. It bothers me every time. And also, look, Trevor Lawrence has no better stats than Blake Bortles. So that's all I'm going to say about this situation. And Evan Ingram, probably the only one on this list that I would drop. But again, he's gotten better with age. He's like a wine, so maybe Evan Ingram can stay, but barely.
Just saying, Evan Ingram was the 2nd-ranked tight end last year, and he had 114 difficult catches, which I do believe all of them probably were difficult, except for the one from the Colts.
And what was it, 6, 7 drops that were right in his chest? That's my problem with Evan Ingram, is he will make the hardest catches you have ever seen for a tight end, maybe even for a receiver. And then he's just like, oh, this is an easy out route. Let me just not catch it because I'm just going to try to cradle it instead of actually catch it with my hands. That's always been my issue with Evan Ingram, is sometimes he needs to catch with his hands and he doesn't. And when he doesn't need to catch with his hands, he's like, nope, I got this, guys. Don't worry. I'm pulling off a miracle. So
I will say his target share last year was insane. Now, they targeted him 143 times and gave him 114 catches. Will he do that again? Probably not. That's why he's not at number 3 or 4 like where he finished last year. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here. But I agree with you, Dalton Schultz. There is room. He finished his tight end 10 last year. There's plenty of room, and Dalton Schultz could be the sneaky one where Sam Laporta is going in around 2, like mid-round 2s, sometimes early round 3s in a lot of leagues. He's worth it. Don't get me wrong, but I'm saying if you don't want to go tight end early, you could let someone else take some of these guys where you grab DJ Moore and Michael Pittman to go along with Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor as your first picks. You have the right swings. Or if you get an early CMC or something like that, then depending on where you pick, you could put off tight end and get a Dalton Schultz, maybe Kyle Pitts if he's hurt enough people in your league that he just sits and goes along there. But there are the gap with tight ends isn't very large, it feels like. It feels like those top 3 or 4 are separate, but after that, you can move a lot of it. And even the top 3 or 4 on a week-to-week basis, tight ends don't burst very often.
Yeah, the big one here is, for me, it's the split between 4 and 5. And no offense to George Kittle, but I think you're right. I don't think George Kittle is in that echelon. It's not because he's not talented. No, he is far and above one of the best, most talented tight ends in the league. Probably top 3, and he's not number 3. But as far as that offense goes, exactly. Yeah, he's too good of a lineman at times. But as far as that offense goes, he gets kind of lost in the sauce. So for me, it's the 4 to 5 split that really differentiates the tight ends. And then after that, we really don't talk about a split until we really get to like 12 or 13 on the tight ends list, with opportunities to for guys to jump that. But It's very rare you see that. But, somebody on this list that has an opportunity as far as on the top 10 and can go up, obviously George Kittle. Let's just skip past that one.
He was number 5 last year while getting ignored for half the season. If somebody goes down and he becomes a feature, he's number 2 or 1, arguably, real quick if he becomes a feature.
But I look at David Njoku and Kyle Pitts as the 2 guys here on this list that are, for this one, bottom 5 here on the top 10. They can easily be in the top 5 just with better target shares. And now you have Njoku with a full offseason with his quarterback, and obviously got some more weapons in there. Can that offense run? It's going to really be the big issue there for any success in Cleveland. But I think Njoku is going to be kind of at the heart of that, along with Amari, as really the driving force for this going forward. And I'd even say David Bell more so than anybody else on that offense. But beyond Njoku, and then you have the concerns about Nick Chubb coming back. But yeah, Njoku is going to be the leader there in the clubhouse. I mean, goodness, he came back from a game with burns on his face and had an outstanding game, and outstanding next 3 weeks with burns on his face. I mean, come on. If you can do that in the NFL, I'm going to give you a lot of credit. I will say
that is the starting quarterback. When he played with the starting quarterback, it wasn't quite as much. Him and Deshaun didn't click as well as him and Flacco and the others did. He didn't have the burst. If Deshaun finds him more frequently, easy peasy, lemon and squeezy. And I think also the play calling, David Njoku took that step up, and the play calling matched it to go with it. So maybe it carries over. Maybe I'm not. But I agree with you. He could be number 3, 2, real quick.
The difference also in quarterback comfortability in a play action set offense instead of Deshaun, who's not really used to that under center play action style, whereas Flacco, that is his bread and butter. That's also a big difference. So can Stefanski make that adaptation? That is always a question. But I would say the one name that's not on here, and we haven't even talked about him yet, but I think it's worth mentioning right now before he has his first season in the league. We're talking about the first tight end drafted in this draft. Probably the best tight end we've seen come out recently, and that's Brock Bowers. I think it's worth mentioning. This guy can easily skyrocket up this board, and it's no competition really for him. I mean, yes, there's competition, but let's be honest. Is there? Is there? I don't know.
Mayer's pretty nice. Like, that's why it's
I love Mayer. I love Mayer, but I also love Harrison Bryant. That's behind him as well. But you know what? Look, Brock Bowers is a different monster.
The nice part of the Raiders is Luke Getz is the offensive coordinator, and he ran 12 personnel more than everyone else in the league last year with the Bears. So they will both be on the field. My question is, how are they going to be used? And will Gardner, O'Connell, whoever's playing quarterback, find them? And Devontae, there's some.
It's a shame the Cowboys couldn't go get Brock Bowers. Is all I'm going to say.
It's a shame.
I love you, Ferguson, but I'm sorry. It's a shame Brock Bowers couldn't end up in the Cowboys.
That wouldn't be fair. That's why you would enjoy it as well. But it
look, I need Dak Prescott to have his safety blanket and tight end again, and Jake Ferguson is there. But come on, Brock Bowers.
That's perfectly fair. And this is what we have for position rankings. We do have one more fun category, and this one especially for Kelsey. And I adequately named it after his favorite type of fantasy to play. We are calling it the best ball ballers. These are guys where, as much as everyone knows, Kelsey loves / hates best ball. It's the league where you don't have to set your lineups. It automatically takes the best players at the end of the week. These are guys where if you take them and draft them and put in your lineup, week to week, they will annoy you or they will explode. When you put them on your bench, they'll give you 40. When you start them, you'll get 4. Tyler Lockett with Seattle, kind of the story of a lot of his tenure with Seattle the last few years. The offense with Ben Grubb, he's going to spend a lot of time isolated on the backside of some of their sets, which means in the right weeks, he'll give you 4 for $120 and a tud. Other weeks, he won't do a whole lot. I think just the role he's going to play in that Ben Grubb offense, that's how he's going to fit. Chase Brown with the Bengals, if he could just cover the football, cover the points, roll with it, no more fumbles, Billingsley, he is going to be absolutely explosive. And he had like 40 touches last year and still had a fumble. It was his knock at in Illinois, and it's knock in the NFL. He's explosive. He's awesome. He can make plays. He's going to make some. I think Zach Moss is going to poach a lot of the carries and the touchdowns. The screen passes, the checkdowns, Chase Brown's going to be electric. Christian Watson, we saw this the year he was healthy. He had a 4-week stretch where he was incredible and scores 6 of his 8 touchdowns. It's the other weeks in between where it's a little rough. And I think the way the offense runs, he'll get his shot or a game. Question is, will he catch it? He'll finish some games with like 2 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown. But then the next week, he'll be like 3 catches for 5 yards. He's a boomer bust. Jaylen Warren, the only reason I'm worried here is him and Najee Harris is a running back by committee. They both scored very similarly last year. Jaylen Warren just didn't get the touchdowns. He's used more in the passing game. So I think in the right situation and also it's Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, Neither one are exactly known for throwing like to the running backs out of the backfield that often or frequently. And Arthur Smith's the OC, and I don't know what to go with him. He's a backup running back on an Arthur Smith team. That's usually a good sign if we learn anything from Tyler Algier. So Malik Neighbors on the Giants. Who else is Daniel Jones going to throw to? Like at this point, who else is getting the ball in there? Darius Slayton sometimes will get the ball, but it's Malik Neighbors or bust. I think he's going in a lot of those like 5th round ranges, which I think isn't bad. My concern is those weeks where the Giants just can't block anybody and Daniel Jones can't read the field. They are bound to happen, like when they play the Cowboys, for example, and Micah Parsons is harassing them. Those are weeks where he's going to get you like 0.03 or something. Aaron Jones with the Vikings, it's Aaron Jones, and he's arguably RB1 with the Vikings. He's going to have opportunities. We mentioned him earlier, Tua Tagovailoa. That is why he is here, is because those weeks where he is awesome, he is going to be absolutely awesome and give you 29. I don't know if you feel comfortable starting him over some other guys. If we talked about Tua already, I think in those best ball leagues, there are going to be some weeks where he will win it for you. Same with Devin Achane. He's going really high in a lot of drafts. A lot of people love him, and I like him a lot. He's explosive as all hell. He scored like 60% of his fantasy points last year in 2 games, especially that Denver outburst that had him. That game alone where he scored 46 points basically put him in the top 10 for scoring running backs. He's awesome. My concern is he someone you maybe as a flex option here and there, but I don't. He's getting drafted as an RB1, or an RB2 / lower RB2 in a lot of ones. I feel a little iffy with that. Jameson Williams, kind of the same story with Christian Watson. I think now that he'll actually be on the field, hopefully more often, he won't get suspended or injured. He'll get his bomb plays here and there. Obviously, the offense is going to run through the running backs, Amon-Ra, Sam Laporta. Williams will take the top off in a handful of games. And then the last one, the fantasy dynamo of the last 5 years, Austin Eckler. I just don't know how they're going to use him. I really don't. Like Brian Robinson's there. Austin Eckler said he's not a tote the ball running back, so he's going to be used in the passing game primarily. I think there will be weeks where he's featured a lot. Jane Daniels will find him. He'll have like 8 catches for 70 yards. Then there'll be other weeks where Jane Daniels is throwing the ball up the sideline to Terry McLaurin instead. So Austin Eckler, the consistent part worries me, so that's why he's here. I think he's a very good flex option as well. But these are all guys I look at. You don't want them as RB1, RB2 necessarily, or receiver 1, receiver 2s. You want them as a flex or someone, if you play a best ball league, you're going to love having this guy. Just grabbing him later because he will randomly win you a week or 2 throughout the season.
I like it. I like these guys as a whole. Honestly, I didn't see anybody on there that I really disliked. Again, I don't know how I feel about Malik Neighbors. Rookies are what they are. But I think everybody else is a pretty accurate one. One I just like to call out there is a potential, flex plus guy. I'm not going to go with the number 1 running back in this team. I'm going to go with the number 2, and that's Tajay Spear.
That's a good one.
I think Tajay Spear has an opportunity here. I love Tony Pollard. I thought he was a great spell back. I don't think he's a great every down back. And with Tennessee, they're using him as an every down back, which leaves Tajay Spear as a 3rd down scat back, spell back, who comes in, bursts off a 20, 30-yard gain like he did with Derrick Henry. Difference is Derrick Henry was a battering ram and Tajay Spear was lightning bolt. Now you have 2 kind of lightning bolts in their own right. How's that gonna work out? We'll see. But yeah, I think that's my big call out there. So maybe one that you might want to look at as well beyond just our top 10 here for a flex plus type of position, because I do like that option. As a big ball, best balls is interesting because you just draft whatever's available. And hey, don't forget Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's always out there.
Well, I'll spoil it now too. I think Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be in a top 25-ish receiver role. I think he's going to be a receiver too once the season gets rolling. But we can got plenty more time to go over all that sort of stuff. We are in 5 weeks from today. We'll be making week 1 flex fantasy decisions and stressing on who we're putting in our flex spot and who we're starting. We are 5 weeks away from making that. And starting next week begins our 5-week journey for the NFL season predictions, where we will go divisions by division throughout, making our predictions, our Super Bowl picks, and our award winners by the end of it as well. Sometimes there's some good, sometimes there's some bad, sometimes there's some ugly. Either way, it is always a good 5-week stretch for us, and I look forward to getting started next week.
Why'd you just have to describe me like that, man? You couldn't give me a break? Couldn't give me a break? We're wrapping up this one, and you were like, nah, I'm going to take that last shot at Kelsey while I can.
The ugly was for me. I mean, yours was the good, and Drew was the bad.
All right, touche.
We can go several different ways of this, but we appreciate y'all for joining us for this much longer episode as we take a look at some fantasy football rankings. as of July 31st when we make these. Once again, be sure to keep tuning in next week as we do start the season predictions, as well as the Fantasy Football Expo coverage as well, where we can compare some of these rankings with some other people, what other people have, what they think, and then just got a lot of stuff in the world of fantasy football coming up, as well as our predictions. So it's a busy upcoming month for us leading into the NFL season. We are less than 100 days out, everybody. We're getting real close to opening kickoff. We are right around the corner. Can't wait for it. Kelsey, we're getting close. It's almost there, but we appreciate you all for hanging out with us as well.
Yeah, can't wait, guys. We appreciate it as always, and we'll see you guys again next time.